The scene playing right now as I am talking is one that continues from the end of episode 18 into episode 19 that is a pivotal point in Nao's character development that I'm going to give some context to the events that are going on. At the beginning of the series we are introduced to the mysterious transfer students of Nao and Masanori, and it is from episode 18 that the show puts a main focus onto them. The class learns from Michi's discovery of an article in a gossip magazine about Masanori's father being a former teacher who killed a student relating to the rape and murder of his daughter in a previous series of the show. For now, he has slowly begun to make some friends in the class in the form of Miki and Naomi, and also, though he doesn't realise it himself due to Nao's fake online persona, Ken, aka Hasaken. He also is very resolute in his beliefs still, and he will fight if he believes there is injustice occurring, and he takes Michi's comments about Masanori and his father as cruel and confronts him about it, resulting in quite an intense fight between the two. The fight is something that has built up over the show, and we get to this point knowing that Nao is in counselling and taking the first steps in his transition, but this is still a secret from the class. The show has educated us on what Nao is going through, but also on the limitations in the legal structure and how the overall idea of being transgender isn't generally accepted or known yet. Nao's kept it hidden, but it is in this fight that he ends up, due to the spiked comments by Michi that question his gender, saying he'd only put up with him because he was a girl, is what causes him to snap. Because he isn't a girl.
そうだ。汚いことばかりして男の風上にもいや人間として許せない。だからお前は尻尾だけ振ってるペットだ。
だったらお前は何者だ。お前は人間か。それでも女か。
私は女じゃない。
No.
私は
No.
男だ。男？あなたが
笑うな！
だったらこいつは何なんだよ。化け物かよ。
本当は男なんだ。
There is a very mixed initial reaction to Nao's coming out to the class. Confusion, laughter, and the rejection Nao feels from this reaffirms deep down feelings he has of being a black sheep. Nao had hid the fact he was transgender from the class for fear of this rejection the initial reaction has enforced. The feeling that keeps many people, even today, from being the person they truly feel they are. A lot of the reactions are that of bemusement, unsure how to process the fact, and unaware of the implications of what Nao has just said. This reaction, though, has him resolute on never returning to school. The confession is followed by over a minute of panned camera shots, was only a backing track to the scene, showing the pain on Kinpachi-sensei's face as he feels he's failed to protect Nao as he's confessed against his will, really. The confusion on the face of the class of the knowledge the viewer has known for many episodes now. The scene also reinforces that fear of rejection.
先生、ミキにありがとうって伝えてください。
Nao's walk away from the school cuts a lonely, solemn figure for someone who now feels isolated from the class due to admitting this. Even now, coming out leads to fears of rejection, that people who would be friends would abandon you and no longer speak to you because of this. And unlike now, where recent guidance from the education ministry in Japan actually recommends allowing transgender pupils attend school as their chosen gender, there was barely a support network for students like Nao at this time. And in the end, it's left to Kinpachi-sensei, who has rejected help even from the principal, to give the class this guidance on the issue, to explain to them what Nao has been through. I want to make a very specific point on how this would impact the viewer who was watching this episode. I've already mentioned a few times how the show is educating the viewer about transgender issues throughout the show. This season helps reinforce the reason why this has to happen. There is nothing wrong or unnatural about who Nao is, yet people who come out are targeted or rejected, like what happens in this very scene. I've also mentioned how over the show the writers have used a few different techniques to introduce the topic to the public, such as getting you to feel empathy with Nao and become attached so you already feel something for Nao before it is revealed he is transgender. They've let you learn about the limitations on the current system in Japan at that time and how it can put a strain on transgender individuals. And now they've introduced the reason why so many have fears of coming out, the response to them doing so. Nao's return home, where he goes home saying that he can never go back because it came out. Society has a way of making trans people feel invalidated and that they're wrong in the head. And in some ways, because of this lack of full acceptance, it's still the case today. The scene is an embodiment of that lack of acceptance and is arguably the most important in that regard. Following other developments to Nao's character, we finally get taken to episode 21, which is where we finally see him return to school, and it is here everything that had been brought up over the show regarding this topic is coming together into one in some ways. It is here that we see Nao explain in more detail to the class what he's been through and his feelings about being transgender. It explains how he grew up confused that he wasn't put with the other guys in elementary school, how he believed that even though he didn't have one, a penis would grow for him, until he was warned about going on a slide while having a period, which is when he realised that he wouldn't have this happen, and it made him distraught, and he explains this. He also goes on explaining about how he regretted being unable to urinate while standing up with the other guys that he was friends with, and what all of this means for him. This is told as part of a larger lecture, which is easily the single most important moment in the show for cementing the impact it was able to have on transgender views in Japan. What we see occur with this lecture, organised by Kinpachi-sensei to teach his class, is an accessible way to teach them about as complex an issue as gender dysphoria and transgenderism, which is what Nao's character basically embodies. This in turn is then a lecture for the viewer, and takes up the majority of this episode alone, talking about things like masculinity, femininity, what they're supposed to be in terms of the person, what terms like gender identity mean, and how it all relates to Nao. It's an important thing for the show to do when tackling this topic, especially at a time when detailed knowledge is basically unknown. It lets them know the hurdles transgender people had, such as how even after transitioning, they would be stuck with their birth gender on the family registry, which couldn't be changed, and other things, at least at the time anyway. It almost gives the viewer a goal to aim at. It lets them know that these are the problems that transgender people have, why don't we change them? And while that's almost the message being told to the class, it in turn is being told to the viewer. The viewer is a pupil in Kinpachi-sensei's class for this lecture, and that's what helps the messages being spoken by this be taken to heart by so many people. Going back to things I mentioned right at the beginning of this video, we did have the topic being discussed in the late 90s to early 2000s in Japan, but there wasn't a very detailed knowledge known by the general populace, and some of it was quite misguided. The inclusion in a major drama with an established place in Japanese culture, taking a serious look at the topic and giving people that mentioned knowledge that they lacked, it led to a Japan with more knowledge on the subject and allowing for more fact-based, detailed debate on the topic, while also making it an event of interest, or a topic of interest, to people in Japan. The fact the story was told so well, with the actress playing now in Ueto Aya getting lots of praise for how she was able to play the role, even winning an award, it also helped to keep people engaged. This mix of factors helped build on a growing momentum that led to the passing of legislation in 2003, which tackled some of the issues brought up in the show, like now allowing people to legally change their gender. Of course, it wasn't the only event. Things don't happen in a bubble. There were other events occurring, such as the situation with Aya Kamikawa, a male to female transgender woman who stood for election in Setagaya-ku in Tokyo, a quite conservative area, and placed 6th in the election out of 72 councillors standing for 52 seats in that area, and therefore winning a place on the council. Legal cases on things such as unfair dismissal also ruled in favour of trans people around and following the airing of this drama. Before in 2003 there was the passing of that aforementioned act, the Act on Special Cases in Handling Gender Status for Persons with Gender Identity Disorder, which did allow the change of gender on family record, though it did stipulate some conditions. There is also the problem with the medical classification that Kinpachi-sensei decides to take with this topic. They spend a long time on medicalizing gender dysphoria, about the time that is spent on the social problems which now has brought up himself. I truly feel this wasn't done with bad intentions or to paint these people as being ill. In fact, the show counters this point itself and specifies that they don't think that they are ill or mentally diseased or anything like that. However, as I have mentioned, this show got very high viewership and rode a slowly growing momentum behind transgender rights. And with this high viewership, the show was one of the most influential sources of information for transgender issues for a few years and leading into the passing of the legislation in 2004. By medicalizing the concept of being transgender and enforcing the term of gender identity disorder, Seidoitsu Shogai, this in turn became a de facto term for referring to transgender individuals, and even now the term is used in Japan despite a worldwide push to declassify transgenderism as a disorder, and instead the use of the term gender dysphoria, one I personally much prefer. There's a whole other debate regarding the term itself not having the negative connotations and being preferred by some influential trans rights activists in Japan that I won't go discussing in any great detail here, but it should be pointed out that this medicalization has stuck long after the show finished. It would have to be said, however, that even with it, the situation for trans people in Japan did get better by the time the law had passed, through greater understanding and acceptance. When you consider the situation in 2004, where the law that passed the previous year came into effect, and 1994, just 10 years earlier, when sex reassignment surgery was still illegal, it would be hard to argue that at least some advancement hadn't happened, and this advantage that did happen came thanks to the Japanese media and this series of Kinpachi-sensei. At least that's what I feel. Ever since Torai Masai's coming out and the celebrity that followed him in doing so causing a debate to begin to occur, Kinpachi-sensei was able to advance discussion with an informed, fair and well-handled look into transgender issues that, even considering these other events, is something that I feel was the thing that had the biggest impact in advancing and allowing the introduction and passing of legislation that helped make the lives of trans people easier by giving them the ability to do things such as change their legal gender that they had not been able to do before. Sure, it had its problems, and it still does, and for sure it wasn't an overnight cure to discrimination. But the show ushered in an advance in trans rights, and it deserves to be recognised for that. To see the normalisation of transgender people occur in Japan and to receive equality, however, this couldn't be a one-time thing. There couldn't be the passing of legislation and one big show in Kinpachi-sensei and then things just to be left at that. There'd be more shows and movies talking about the topic, or even just including transgender people. There'd be discussions outside of the media, possibly influenced by media, but taking place independent of the media, for the idea that people can be transgender to be a normal part of the Japanese psyche. And this did begin to occur after Kinpachi-sensei aired.